Hello everyone, welcome to this episode of The Vile Necromancer. Actually, it's more like the episode of creating a character old school style. Came up with the title tonight. Well, not tonight, the time that this video is being posted, the night before. Today is the 28th, so I'm filming this video before I post it on the 29th. Today we're talking about races. I was going to do classes originally, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go stats, races, and then classes. And our first two classes, give you a little sneak peek, it's going to be Fighter and Thief. And then Cleric, Magic User, a Monk. Those are those I'm going to split it up into 3 chunks. Because Fighter has 3 subclasses. So if I do the five classes technically, that'll be 5 and 5. So kind of works out. But today, as I said, we're going to be talking about races. So let me grab my PHB up here. Got another shelf up. That also has my 2nd edition Dungeon Master's Guide up there. And I added the Dungeon Master's Adventure Log up top there. So let us begin. Races. Character races. This is what Gary has to say about character races. After a player has determined the ability scores of his or her character, it is then time to decide of what racial stock the character is to be. For the purposes of the games, the racial stocks are limited to the following: Dwarven, Elven, Gnome, Half-Elven, Halfling, Half-Orc, and Human. Each racial stock has advantages and disadvantages, although in general, human is superior to the others for reasons you will discover as you read on. Dungeon Master may have restrictions as to which races are allowed in the campaign due to circumstances of the milieu. So, we're going to talk about the racial stock of characters. This is going to be your character class limitations. This is on Character Race Table 1. So, let us begin. If you are to play a dwarf, you can play a fighter, a thief, or an assassin. If you are to play an elf, you can play a fighter, a magic user, a thief, or an assassin. If you are to play a gnome, you can play a fighter, a illusionist, a thief, or an assassin. A half-elf can play a cleric, a druid, a fighter, a ranger, a magic user, a thief, and an assassin. If you are a halfling, you can play a fighter, you can play a thief. If you are a half-orc, you can play a cleric, you can play a fighter, you can play a thief, or you can play an assassin. And if you're a human, you can play a cleric, druid, fighter, paladin, ranger, magic user, illusionist, thief, assassin, or monk. In my games, I also allow elves and dwarves to play clerics, but that's just a personal decision I do. And if you're playing with the Unearthed Arcana rules, you can play any class you want to. Yes, so we'll get into level caps in the what's it called? Class video. Not this video. Today we're specifically going to be looking at races. So races. There's a column. So if you need to know, well, do I meet the racial limits of this class? Well, on Character Race Table 3, you'll find ability scores, minimums, and maximums. I also read them out loud yesterday during the stats video, so feel free to take a listen to that. We shall begin. We're not going to read the minimum maximums. We're just going to skip right into the meat and potatoes of the races. So, we begin with dwarf. As a dwarf, this is what Gary says about dwarves. The races of dwarves typically dwell in hilly or mountainous regions. For details of the race in general, the reader is referred to Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Monster Manual. As a player character, both dwarves and their cousins, the mountain dwarves, can be considered. A character of dwarven race can be a fighter, a thief, or an assassin, as I said previously. It is possible for dwarven characters to opt to work simultaneously in the fighter and thief classes. In the latter event, the dwarf will be limited to the armor permitted by a thief when performing any functions of that class. Experience will always be divided between the 2 classes. Also, even though the dwarf may no longer advance upwards in fighting ability level, complete information regarding the subject is given here under in the section dealing with character classes. So, I'm going to read that first little segment, and then we're going to dive into abilities. As a dwarf, you can speak Dwarven, obviously, Gnome, Goblin, Kobold, and Orcish. In addition, Dwarven characters are able to speak the common tongue of all humankind and their alignment language. They're unable to learn more than 2 additional language, regardless of their intelligence ability. Dwarves are able to see radiation in the infrared spectrum, so they can see up to 60 feet in the dark, noting varying degrees of heat radiation. This ability is known as infravision. Dwarves are also miners, so if they're in 10 or less feet of the particular phenomenon, they can detect these while, I think, actively searching for them. Yes, the character must be actively searching to determine the phenomenon in question in order to be able to determine the answer. So, they can detect on a 75%, that's a D4, score 1 through 3. They can detect grade or slope in passage, upwards or downwards. On a 75% probability of just any kind, I assume it'd be on that D4, detect new construction or passage tunnel, or passage/tunnel. Detect sliding or shifting walls or rooms on a 66 and 2/3 probability. On a D6 is a score of 1 to 4. Detect traps involving pits, falling blocks, and other stonework. 50% probability, so you can either do that with a D4 on 1 or 2, or a D6 score on a 1 or 3. And then determine approximate depth underground. Again, that 50% probability. On either the D6 or the D4, I'd take it. As a dwarf, you are your initial constitution ability adds a +1 to it. So if you had 16, it becomes 17, and your charisma loses 1. So if you had a 16, it would now become 15. And then we're on to elves. Elves can actually, there are many sorts of elves, and descriptions in the differing types of monsters are found in the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Monster Manual. Elven players are always considered to be high elves, the most common sort of elves. In my games, you are almost always a high elf. I've had one player run a wood elf henchman, but he was just sitting in on a session, and I mean, he wasn't actually playing a wood elf. He never came back. He just kind of popped in for that game. Anyways. A character of elven stock can opt to be a fighter, a magic user, a thief, or an assassin. An elven character can also be multi-classed as a fighter magic user, a fighter thief, a magic user thief, a fighter magic user thief. And that's all. If the character is multi-class, the following restrictions and strictures are applied. Although able to operate freely with the benefits of armor, weapon, and magic items available to the classes the character is operating in, any thieving is restricted to the armor and weaponry usable by the thief class. All earned experience is always divided equally among the classes, as with the dwarf. That is also going to be talked about in the character class section. So, elves have a 90% resistance to sleep and charm. If these spells are cast upon them, a percentile dice roll of 91% or better is required to allow the magic any chance of having an effect. Even then, the saving throw against spell is allowed versus the charm spell. When employing either a bow or any other sort other than a crossbow or a short or long sword, elven characters gain a +1 on their die rolls to hit. Meaning, when I roll my d20 and I'm using a short sword as an elf, I add a +1 to that. So if I roll an 18, I'm now getting a 19. Plus my to hit bonus if I'm a fighter, so that could be +2, possibly. It could be better than +2. That's just an example. All elven characters are able to speak the following languages in addition to their chosen alignment: Elven, or Elvish, Gnome, Halfling, Goblin, Hobgoblin, Orcish, Gnoll, and the common tongue of mankind. Elven characters above 15 intelligence are able to learn 1 additional language for every point of intelligence over 15. So a character of 18 could learn 3 additional languages. Elves have the ability to see in the infrared spectrum, same as the dwarves. It is 60 feet. Secret doors or concealed doors are difficult to hide from elves. Merely passing within 10 feet of the latter makes an elven character on a 1 in 6 likely to notice it. If actively searching for that door, it's raised up to a 2 in 6 chance likely to find a secret door, and 50% likely, a 3 in 6 chance, to discover a concealed portal. Now, I'll talk about this. I'm not going to make a whole video on my concealed rant, and yeah, I'll just explain it as such. A hidden door is a door that specifically was meant to be hidden in the first place. A concealed door, let's say I had a door right here, and I'm like, well, I don't really want people going in there. I'm just going to slap a bookshelf or a tapestry over it. That's a concealed door, because it's not specifically designed to be hidden. That's the difference. Now, where was I? Elven characters add a bonus to their initial dexterity score, so if you had a 16, it now become a 17, and they get a deduct 1 from their initial constitution score, so that 16 would be a 15. If alone in not metal armor, or well in advance 90 feet or more of a party which does not entirely consist of elves and or halflings, an elven character moves so silently that he or she will surprise monsters on a 1 through 4 on a d6. That time of the time, unless so a 1 through 4 of the time, unless some portal must be opened in order to confront the monsters. In the latter case, the chance of surprise will drop to a 2 in 6 chance, so like a 1 to 2. Gnomes. I like gnomes. I play a lot of illusionists, actually, so I play a lot of gnomes. As said here, gnomes preferred in habitation is the area of rolling rocky hills, well wooded and uninhabited by humans. Details of the race are obviously found in the monster manual. Those will be like the character movements. I think it's 12 for an elf and 9 for a dwarf. Could be wrong. And I think it's 6 for halflings and gnomes. Maybe. I don't know. If you're going to play this, pick up a copy of the monster manual. Look at the halfling stats and see what the movement rate is. I may go over movement in a separate video, actually. When we talk about exploration, I'll mention them then. Mental note to that. So if you're wanting to know that now, you'll have to look it up yourself, or you can wait for the exploration video. So, where was I? Yes, gnomes. A character of the gnome race can be selected to be a fighter, an illusionist, a thief, or an assassin. It is also possible to be a fighter illusionist, a fighter thief, or an illusionist thief, for example. In the latter case, the character is restricted to the wearing of leather armor regardless of which one combination he or she has chosen, unless only fighting is performed by the character. As with any such multi-class character, gnomes with 2 character classes must always divide earned experience equally between levels, even though it may no longer be possible to advance upwards in level in one of the classes. Similarly to their cousins of dwarves, they have high magic resistance. They gain a +1. I don't think I mentioned that for dwarves. Dwarves also gain like a +1 to their yes. I will for dwarves. They gain a +1 to every 3.5 points of Constitution. Thus, if a dwarf has a Constitution of 7, he or she would gain a +2 on dice rolls made as a saving throw. This is against magic wands, staves, rods, and spells. I think that's all I messed up. Anyways, they also gain a +1 for every 1.5 points. So obviously, a Constitution score of 4 gains a +1, 7 gains a +2, 11 gains a +3, 14 gains a +4, so on and so forth. Gnomes are able to speak the following languages in addition to their alignment tongue. They're able to speak the common tongue, Dwarvish, Gnome, Halfling, Goblin, Kobold, and they also can communicate with any burrowing mammals such as moles, badgers, ground squirrels, etc. Gnomes are unable to learn more than 2 languages in addition to those noted above, regardless of how high their intelligence score is. So, gnomes also have infravision up to 60 feet. They are able to make the same detections as a dwarf. Actually, no, they're not. They're able to make different ones. They're able to detect greater slope and passage upward or downward on a 80% probability. On D10, that's 1 through 8. Detect unsafe walls or ceilings or floors. That's 70%. That's on a 1 or 7 on a D10. Determine approximate depth underground. That is a D10, 1 through 6. Determine direction of travel underground. D any, score any half. So we're just going to stick with the good old D6, that'd be 1 through 3, or the D4, 1 to 2. You get where I'm going here. You just take that number, divide it in half. In melee combat, they add +1 to their die rolls to hit opponents who are kobolds or goblins. Did I mention that with dwarves? Dwarves gain the +1 with half-orcs, goblins, hobgoblins, or orcs, and they subtract 4 if it's an ogre, a troll, an ogre magi, a giant, and or titan. However, the gnomes get the kobolds or goblins. They add +1. When being attacked by gnolls, bugbears, ogres, trolls, ogre magi, giants, and or titans, gnome characters subtract 4. Is that the same with dwarves? Let me check. I just had it. Nope, it's just half-orcs. So they actually get more. Subtract 4 from their opponents to hit dice roll because of the gnome's small size and their combat skill against these much bigger creatures. Half-elves. Half-elves do not form a race unto themselves, but rather they can be found amongst both elvenkind and mankind. For details of the typical half-elf, see Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Monster Manual under the heading Elf. A character or half-elven race can play as a cleric, a druid, a fighter, a ranger, a magic user, a thief, or an assassin. A character of half-elven race can also, like many others, multi-class. A cleric, fighter, cleric, ranger, cleric, magic user, fighter, thief, magic user, thief, cleric, fighter, magic user, or a fighter, magic user, thief. Halfling characters who choose the cleric as one of their multi-classes aren't limited by that class's proscriptions upon weapon usability, but they are quite restricted in level. Half-elven characters who choose the thief class as one of their multi-roles are limited to the weaponry and armor of that class when operating as a thief. All earned experience is always divided evenly between the classes. Obviously, we've learned that a million times before. Half-elves gain a 30% chance to sleep and charm spells. So if a sleep spell is cast upon them, a percentile dice roll of 31% or better is required. Yes. All half-elf characters are able to speak the common tongue of man and their alignment language in the following. They're able to speak Elvish, Gnome, Halfling, Goblin, Hobgoblin, Orcish, and Gnoll. Halfling characters of an above 16 intelligence are able to learn 1 additional language for every point they have above 16. So that is 17 intelligence indicates a character can learn 1 additional language, and an 18 intelligence indicates 2 languages can be learned in addition to those listed above. Halfling, or not halflings, have I been saying halflings this entire time? Half-elves, Lord, have obviously that 60 feet dark vision, and they also have the concealed doors ability, but they have a 1 in 6 chance. If the character is actively looking for it, they have a 2 in 6 chance of spotting a secret door and a 3 in 6 chance of locating a concealed door. Now on to halflings. Halflings are very much like small humans, thus their name. As player characters, it is assumed that any of the subraces of the halflings can be considered of that of the halfling character in question. Complete information on halflings is found in the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Monster Manual. A character of the halfling race can play a fighter, a thief, or a fighter-thief. As halflings are unable to work beyond 6th level as a fighter, it is more probable that the character will be a thief or a multi-classed fighter-thief. In the latter case, the character is limited to the armor and weaponry of a thief whenever any such functions are performed during the course of an adventure. Furthermore, as with all other character classes, you take your experience points and divide them evenly, even if upward progression, let's say you're a fighter of 6th level, I mean, you're still having it and technically putting half of it into your fighter. But onwards we go. All halfling thieves have a high resistance to magical spells, so for every 1.5 points of constitution. Why did they say 1.5? 3/2 points of constitution ability. The character possesses he or she +1 on saving throws versus wand, staves, rods, and spells. This converts to the following bonuses for constitution. On a 4 to 6, it's +1. On a 7 to 10, it's +2. On an 11 to 13, it's +3. On a 14 to 17, it's +4. And on an 18, it is +5. As halflings also have similar resistances to poisons, they gain a constitution bonus when they make a identical to that saving throw versus magical attacks when they make a save versus poison, i.e. +1 to +5, depending on constitution score. So take those constitution scores I just read out, and that's going to be your new saving throw modifier. No, I still have a lot more to read. So, halflings are able to speak, obviously, common tongue alignment language, dwarven, elven, gnome, goblin, halfling, and orcish. And halflings with a intelligence above 16 can learn one additional language for every point of intelligence they possess above the 16 minimum. So at 17, the character can possess one, and at 18, they can have two. They have an infravision of 30 feet. Stoutish blood halflings are able to see heat radiation varying up to 60 feet. Normal infravision. Similarly, halflings of mixed type and those of pure stoutish blood are able to note if a passage is up or downgrade, 75%, d4, 1 to 3, of the time. And they can determine direction 50% of the time. Note, these ability functions function only when the character is concentrating on the desired information to the exclusion of all other thought and activity. So, no thinking about how many gold you're getting over there. No, we're thinking about where's the hidden door where I can find more gold. That's what we're thinking. If alone or well in advance, 90 feet or more, of a party which is not consistent of entirely halflings or elves, not in metal armor, halfling characters are able, if the halfling is also not in metal armor, the halfling is able to move very silently. Thus, if they do open some form of door or other screen, they will surprise a monster on a 1 to 4 of the time. If a door must be, if they do not, but if they do, it's a 1 to 3. Same with the elves. The half orcs. Orcs are they create many crossbreeds, most of the offsprings of such being typically orcish. However, some 1/10th of orc human mongrels are sufficiently non-orcish to pass for humans. Complete details of orcs and crossbreeds will be found under the heading orc, as it is assumed that the player, which are of a half-orc race, are within the superior 10%, they will have certain advantages. A half-orc character can become a cleric, a fighter, a thief, or an assassin. It is possible for a half-orc character to operate in 2 of these classes at the same time, such as cleric fighter, cleric thief, cleric assassin, fighter thief, or fighter assassin. When playing a multi-class character, the half-orc must abide by the restrictions of the least favorable class with regard only to armor. All earned experience is always divided equally between the player's 2 classes, even though the character might no longer be able to progress upward in level in one of the 2 classes, as we've said a million times before with all the other ones. Half-orcs are able to speak the common tongue of humanity, their alignment language, and orcish as well. These characters are able to learn a maximum of 2 additional language. Even if your little thing at the bottom says, I know 4 additional languages. No, you don't. You can only speak 2 more. As half-orcs also have that 60 feet of dark vision, as has been shown here, half-orc characters have a +1 bonus to their strength and a constitution score initially rolled, but they must subtract a +2 from their charisma. Note that this penalty is in regards to those non-player character henchmen who are not themselves of half-orc races. So the initial unaltered charisma score can be recorded. That is also the same with dwarves. Dwarves also receive that -2. I think I skipped over that because I don't use that for dwarves. I think dwarves can get along with other people, even though they can be a bit prickish at times. Human characters, they neither give penalties nor bonuses, as they are established as the norm upon which these subtractions or additions for racial stocks are based. Human characters are not limited as to what class of character they can become, nor do they have any maximum limit, other than that intrinsic to this class. Other than that, intrinsic to the class or of level. What else does it say here? They can attain within a class as they are the rule rather than the exception. The basic information given always applies to the human, and racial changes are noted for differences as applicable for non-human or part-human stocks. And then we get into the racial preferences table. It just tells their preferred races, their preferred, which is their G, which is goodwill. Apologies. T, which is tolerant. N is neutral. A is treated with apathy, and H is hatred. Dwarves hate half-orcs, and half-orcs hate dwarves. Of course they do. Humans are treated with neutrality, and elves treat half-orcs with apathy. But you know. So I think that does it kind of for races. We're wrapping up on 26 minutes here. Other than that, when this video comes out, it'll be tomorrow night. The video before this was the racial stats video. I hope you're finding this series helpful. But yeah, join us next time on creating a character old school style. And by old school, we obviously mean AD&D. And by AD&D, we mean Advanced Dungeons and Dragons First Edition. Thank you, folks, and we'll see you next time here on the Vile Necromancer.